The Dragon Lord's Consort Chapter 14. The Trial of the Consort Part 4. Spike screamed out as a blend of red and pink fire engulfed him. He was sent flying just by the blast itself. Ember turned to horror as Spike was engulfed, and she immediately tried to intervene, but Torch was the one that immediately caught her with his large palm. She screamed out to her father to let her out, but sadly, he did not as he watched Cynthia continue her attack. The attack itself was a surprise, but that seemed to be what the dragons in the valley were waiting for, as they all roared and cheered at seeing some action for the first time. The teenagers especially saw the little Drake get blown away. Cynthia stopped her flames, leaving a scorched earth all around the field. About 100 feet away lay the baby dragon, whom was covered in red-hot scales and pained expressions. The former successor approached the small Drake like a predator stalking his prey. Spike managed to finally become aware of his surroundings and saw the approaching dragoness. With fear, he scrambled back to his feet. Not taking a chance for him to hide, she took a mighty leap and landed right in front of him. He cried out in fear seeing her approach and jumped out of the way just as she landed and caused a quake that sent him tumbling. Once more, the masses roared in joy as the young Drake narrowly avoided getting crushed and cried out as she reached to try and swipe at him, missing by the scale off of his head.
"The trial here, young Spike,"
she spoke in a rough voice, taking on a pounce-like stance,
"is to know your enemy. Whether they are bigger, smaller, or the same species, you must know how they function, how they work, and whether or not you can deal with them."
Another jump at him caused him to immediately cry out before he managed to fall and roll just as her foot landed. Well, a foot away from him. The ground cracked around her landing, and his ears echoed with a shockwave. Ember managed to peek through her father's large fingers and tried to escape.
Father, let me go!"
she roared.
"He's being attacked!"
"No, Ember, he is in a trial right now," he said calmly.
"What trial has my consort being attacked?"
she yelled, trying her best to break free from her father's grip. "The trial of survival." This caused her to stop struggling.
"Wait, what?"
Her father nodded and brought his palm closer to his gigantic face. "Darian and I have provided will and intellectual challenges, but now he must endure the survival."
"But she'll kill him!"
she roared at him, watching as Spike wane and dodge the ever-pressing attacks of the taller dragon. Not if he knows his instincts well. She is trying to show him that even the largest of enemies can be brought down by one, even as small as him. Spike was starting to tire out. His breath was falling short and his legs were starting to cramp up. His scales were already getting scorch marks and bruising, and meanwhile Cynthia was just getting started.
"Come on, whelp! Retaliate or retreat! Know your areas quickly! Find cover and make sure your enemies cannot find you!"
She once more lashed at him with her paw. Spike jumped out of the way, however Cynthia reacted faster, and using her whole body, spun with the momentum and used her tail. Spike never saw it coming, and she sent the hatchling flying. Spike felt like a mountain had hit his small body. He was sent flying across hundreds of feet away, until he crashed some distance away from the area. He skidded to a halt where the land around him was earth-raised in ridges and jagged with time. Ember was in hysteria as she roared and yelled at her father to let her go. Torch, however, remained unrelenting, though he was starting to think that this was going rather overboard. Spike groaned, sitting up from his recent launch. He felt and heard the distant sound of the large dragoness approaching. Each stomp from her giant feet had bounced on the floor. Regaining some of his senses, however, he saw her approaching and quickly looked around him, trying to find some cover. He quickly threw himself off the near edge of the small jagged landscape and disappeared from Cynthia's view. And a growl of approval left her.
"Well done, whelp, but now you must be aware that your enemies have heightened senses."
She appeared over the edge where he had fallen, seeing nothing there. She then scanned around, trying to find any traces left. She saw rubble and small scratches from his claws left in an impression on the floor where he had moved towards the lower end of the openings and a small mesa. Small jagged openings were seen, too big for a normal, even teenage dragon that could fit in it, but he on the other claw could. A grin appeared on her muzzle. "Excellent!" she yelled out, using her neck to look into each hole she could see.
"Using your size to take advantage of your enemy. If you're smart, you wait out your enemy until they leave, or..."
She paused over a particular hole.
"Until they snuff you out."
She inhaled and quickly released a powerful flame into the hole into the cliff. Fire spewed from multiple exits, creating almost a no-escape scenario. However, as one didn't expect, the hatchling didn't really come out flying with flames on him. The crowd of dragons had moved from their original post and took on hovering over the area or moved in closer. The cheering continued as Cynthia moved to each hole, trying to sniff out the little dragon. Meanwhile, Spike had successfully hid from her in a large crack off the side of the cliff. His heart beat heavily against his chest, his bones groaned at the numbing feeling that just began to take hold. Tears formed at his eyes, and he half wondered where all of this was really leading to.
Fight or flight?
She echoed all around the rocks.
I want you to understand that. If you do not have wings, then you must stand your ground. I have experience. I have strength. Do not let those intimidate you.
Her footsteps rumbled all around him, shaking the crack that he was in.
Your size gives you advantages to hide. Your experiences with your family and friends have taught you to handle catastrophic events. Your intelligence for one young as you gives you strength. Use them!
Spike paused at that. How many times had he and the others been in life-threatening situations that put Equestria in danger? How many times did he have to deal with threats bigger than himself? Discord? Rogue Dragons? Sombra? When will there be a day when Twilight and the others are not there to help or even stop them? He had always wanted to be a superhero, just like the power ponies in the comics that he would read. To be the one where every pony and every creature would look up to him in awe and joy. Yet here, it was something completely different. He had no friends to help him out, Ember was held back and he had nothing to use against her, but her words echoed around him, over and over in speedy images, size to hide, experiences prior to coming here, and intelligence that matched most pony adults and even surpassed dragon adults. Physically, he couldn't really wear her out. She was big, she was strong, and she could move faster in open spaces than he could. However, he was small, could fit in spaces that she couldn't, and evade her. Experience-wise, she had years in fighting dragons, which might explain the scars that ran across her body. However, she never thought she would have to try and fight a baby dragon, so she wouldn't be putting all of her strength into this. Lastly, his intelligence. He already proved that he was smart, good with memory and will, but he also had books installed in his mind. Now, he might not have a photographic memory like Twilight, but he knew enough that he could use it to his advantages. Memories like the weakness of creatures. How to avoid and survive dangerous creatures in the wild. One of the chapters explained how every creature had a weakness, even ones as big as hydras, manticores, and dragons. Though, it wasn't really a full, complete book. I mean, the book explained how dragon hunters of old targeted weak points of a dragon, the belly, the armpits, the eyes, and, if chance happens, inside the beast itself. But how could he use anything on her? He didn't have really time to answer, though. For the next second, claws dug into the ground and crushed the earth around him. He yelled as it held him in place before it all being scooped around him and it was sent flying into the air. Cynthia roared as she threw the whelp out, where dragons cheered at her find.
Beware,
she taunted, making her way over to him in a feral walk.
Your enemies will have senses that could detect you. I smelled your fear in your body. They will too, and you will sooner or later face them.
Spike quickly moved back to his feet, seeing her approach. He turned to the entryways of the rigid, small openings under the mesa. He quickly ran into the holes, disappearing from her view once more.
Don't use that same tactic before,
she snorted, stomping her way into the holes. She knew that these were all dug out by ancient giant bugs and, in part, erosion. They were all crisscrossed one another in some way or another. Inhaling deeply, she fired once more deep into the holes. Spike wasn't really fully prepared by the blast crying out as the blast nearly carried him out. However, before he could fully come out of the cave, he crashed into a small stalagmite inside and held on while the fire blew past him. He held on until it stopped and fell to the floor.
Oh, rather impressive,
she stated into the caves.
I still smell you in there, but I will reach you.
Her claw then shot into the cave, trying to reach near him. He moved out, quickly jumping out of her claw's reaches. The stalagmite began to jiggle with her wrecking and disturbing the cave's structure, and he moved more out of the way until her claws reached out for the hanging rock.
Got you!
However, when she felt it, she growled and ripped it off, and then dropping it, there off and then. He panted, trying to recover his breath.
Eventually, I will crush the caves around you, leaving you no choice but to come out eventually.
What she said was true, and he had no hope. Already she began breaking certain parts of structures around him, and he could feel the network of caves and tunnels begin to fall around him. He had to find some ways to slow her down at least. He looked around to find anything of use, and his eyes then looked at a broken piece of rock. It was sharp, a little bigger than his body, but thin enough where he could break it in two. He heard her growling, trying to look in the caves for him, and that would be his advantage. She kept taunting him to get him to deal with his enemy. Looks like she gave him an opening. Grabbing the stalagmite, he pushed his foot hard into the middle to break it in half. With a grunt he pushed, pulling back with both of his arms, hearing the cracking rock finally growl, and jammed his foot hard into the middle. The crack was instant and he shuffled back onto his feet, holding the pointed piece of rock. He held on to the bigger piece but readied the smaller piece into his claw. Holding holding it tightly, he cautiously made his way towards the entrance. The caves were becoming unstable and he had to hurry. Something finally snapped in him and he felt anger and rise within him. "Hey, Big Red!" She stopped and looked towards the sound, moving her head towards the entrance. She growled.
Fatal, fatal move, hatchling. Revealing your location to your...
Spike threw the pointed end of the stalagmite at her head like a lance. The piece of large rock flew into the air and hit her straight into her right eye. She roared in pain and quickly moved away from the entrance, trying to coax her eye. This got a rather unique reaction from the outside crowd, with every dragon finding disbelief at the attack towards the successor. She staggered and twisted her head in pain, roaring loudly and moaning, trying to rub her eye out. Ember, Torch, and the other two elders were also into shock at the surprise retaliation on Cynthia. Eliinsa was the one whom actually seemed worried on Cynthia, yet she remained in place. Spike smiled in triumphant as the dragoness retreated and began to try and clear her eye out. The stalagmite might have not seriously hurt her, a poke in the eye at best, but that was enough to really throw her off at him for a bit. She continued to moan out in pain, hissing and trying to rub her eye out. However, it was temporary at best, but now he needed a new plan. He knew that it wouldn't really hold her down for too long. A different thought did come to mind, though. Something that was dangerous and stupid, but mostly... definitely stupid. But he wasn't sure if it would kill him, or it would hurt him badly and might make Ember mad at him, but if it would get him to stop the trials, then he really had no choice. Much to his chagrin, Cynthia already recovered. A smile of admiration passed over her while her right eye remained shut entirely.
Very, very impressive, Spike.
She hissed a little as the pain distracted her.
Never has such as young as you, physically hurt me. Nor tricked me, for that matter. Truly your wit matches your intelligence. I, for one, am truly impressed.
He knew it was a long shot, but from the deep echoes of the cave, he called out to her.
Impressive enough to finish this trial?
He hoped. A sort of amusement and a chuckle left her.
Enough to know that I mustn't hold back.
With that, she roared and began to destroy the cave systems with much more ferocity. Spike gasped at the ground around him, rumbling and cracking, creating large openings for the sky to be visible. Spike tried to retreat deeper into the cave while Cynthia's taunts became more personal.
Truly impressive, Spike. It makes me wonder if your pony friends are the ones that have taught you how to survive, or were they the ones to hold you back?
She continued to destroy the cave systems, though she then stopped and moved away from the system. She huffed, letting smoke leave her nose, and then she began to pace in front of the destroyed mesa.
What will your plan be, Spike? She taunted. What will you do next? You have clearly caught me off guard, but only temporarily. I know how to stay away from the entrances and keep my guard up, but for now, I will find a new way to draw you out, and you must find a new way to stop me.
With that, she swung her body and using her tail, struck the mesa once more. Spike cried out as the floors before him collapsed and she sent tons of flying rocks out. He felt the caves around him falling on top of him, creating a giant pile over him. He squirmed to move out.
You surviving this is my hope, but I also want you to be aware that the danger can and will be real. Find a solution quickly. Your goal is to take me down.
Spike managed to use his claws to begin digging his way out, finding a passage to go through. He saw light, but in it, the red scales on the dragoness came into view, and he shrunk back in and tried to think of a new way. His previous plan was the only plan he had. However, from the crack view he had, part of her leg had been scraped and a small cut formed. A small amount of trickling blood leaked from it, not enough to weaken her, but enough to cause her to hesitate on her front left leg. And he saw an advantage, so he reached down trying to feel for the large stalagmite he still had. Grasping it, he shuffled the loose earth around him and began pushing away towards the clearing. As the large dragoness continued to destroy the mesa, he noticed how she used her tail to do the thrashing, not keen getting too close for another attack. Nor would she fall for the same tactic, and instead, he had to get close to her without her noticing. Every time she spun or swung her tail, her head was momentarily turned and her vision was away, and that gave her a blind spot and an opening. Mental calculations and half-guesses, Spike decided it was do or die. The worst part of that, he wasn't really sure if die was literal in the sense, and embracing himself for the next impact, the remaining part of the cave system collapsed, and himself with it. It was a short fall, but the crumpled ground below him cushioned him, and with a small struggle, managed to loosen himself. Her tail was towards him, and with that, he made a mad dash towards her. With his strength, he made it underneath her, just as she turned to look at her work. The mesa was all but smashed, and any remaining cave systems were completely gone. Worriness slowly covered her features.
Spike?
She called out, trying to see if she saw the whelping in the collapsed land. Spike stayed silent, slowly making his way towards her front-cut palm. Ember, her father, and the others watched in awe as Spike was underneath her without her notice. A few dragons watched try to call out to her to watch the hatchling. Then she felt a small weight on her right palm. Looking down, she had no time to react as Spike, who held a piece of pointed stalagmite in claws, brought the sharp pointed tip directly onto her open wound. The reaction was instant as the howl of pain echoed loudly enough to cause some more ears to hurt. She fell to her side, Spike almost launching in the process, but jumped off her as her body collapsed to the side. She howled loudly with pain, though again, with her size and prior wounds, it was a mere sharp prick than anything, but it was a prick that hit her open wound, and that's where it mattered. Spike was exhausted and he felt like he would collapse at any second, but he knew that this wouldn't hold for long. With his remaining energy, he charged with the rocket claws to her neck while she sat down trying to nurse her wound. Once more, her reaction was slow as she moved just enough only to stop where she felt the rock tip push into her neck and was held at bay. It was no ordinary part of the neck, it was a small patch of scales where it exposed flesh underneath where the jugular would be at. In this case, Spike knew where it was on the anatomy of the dragon and exposed it. If she didn't yield or if she moved, it would be able to stop her permanently. An eerie silence followed and dragons of all were jaw-slacked or in shock, including the elders and Ember, as Spike literally took down a dragon many times his size and had her life in his claws. So quiet that when he spoke it almost echoed to the whole valley and every ear heard it. "Yield," was a simple command. A dark look came upon him and his heart was racing. He was exhausted, downright tired, and he never felt so horrible for doing this. But something in him snapped and it was there to stay. She was trying to take him away from Ember and she was trying to take him away from his family. He didn't want to lose them. He didn't want to die for a stupid trial. He only wanted to rest and be with Ember. Yet here was a dragoness trying to stop that. An angry growl left him as he pushed harder with the point pressing between the folds of the parted scales. Cynthia gasped and swallowed at feeling the rock nearly pushing her breaking point. "Yield!" he yelled. This time everyone heard it and it was frightening that the young dragon could be loud enough to be heard through the valley. "She yields!" cried out Elianza, worried for the other dragon. Ember was shocked to see Spike this way, never expecting a dragon like him to do something so dark. I yield, she stammered, careful not to move so much as that rock would break through. He slowly retreated it, but still had it close. Feeling it still there, she spoke louder so every dragon could hear. "I yield!" For a moment, silence rang as Spike retreated away from her. Then the roaring began. Dragons all around roared and cheered at amazement as the little whelp had won his third trial. The valley echoed with cheerful roars and stomps upon the floors as the whelp from a pony-raised background beat one of the toughest dragons all around. Spike threw the pointed rock down and Cynthia slowly but painfully rose to her paws. She limped a bit when her front palm was still in pain, and then she looked down at the whelpling before her and slowly lowered her head to meet his. Spike looked up at her, taking a cautionary stance, and with a small breath, she spoke to him. Truly impressive," she spoke, her tone of a proud parent. "I have never been beaten by one young as you, nor as intelligent." His posture relaxed and his mood lightened. "I will never forget this challenge." She looked at her wounded palm and gave a little smile. "Another scar to heal, another story to tell." She then met his eyes and bristled with mirth. "You truly are one of a kind." She bowed her head in respect before raising it up high and speaking loudly to all the other dragons. "The trial is finally over. Spike has successfully passed." The draconic cheering doubled in roars and applause. Spike collapsed onto his hind legs with a soft grunt and an irritated sigh. "I just wish to rest now." The comment had Cynthia looking down at the whelp with some pity. He went through 3 trials and was reaching his physical and probably mental ends. Knowing that he was exhausted, she used her injured palm and allowed Spike to be lifted. He looked at the offered paw and, with no complaints, climbed on, albeit hesitating on her injury. She walked on 3 legs towards the other elders, and Ember was hovering, and her father letting her go once Spike had won. As soon as they got close, she immediately dived towards Spike, where she scooped him up from Cynthia's palm. "You won!" she happily exclaimed, hugging him tightly. He felt a nice sense of warmth spread across his body as she hugged, something that felt so welcoming and relaxing. It was as if her physical and close essence rejuvenated his energy. His heart beat strongly in his chest, and the mere heat radiating from his body would make him continue 1,000 more trials if it meant that she would be there for him. But something else came from this, a deep urge from his subconscious mind. It was something that went ignored and something so primal. He wondered if that's where he got his strength to finally beat Cynthia. It was feral, and he heard it speaking. However, it was pushed aside as Ember began to speak to him. His focus came into view as she held him looking deep into his emerald eyes with her bright orange eyes.
The way you thought of something so insane!
She exclaimed, her giddy attitude and bright smile, something that touched him more than anything else.
I didn't think that you would go that far.
Spike gave a small casual shrug, as if it was no big deal.
When you face world-ending villains and scenarios, every time, this is a cakewalk. Then, the final trial should be just as easy then,
started the final elder. Ember and Spike turned to the smaller of the four, who looked a bit strict and had a gleam in her eyes. Ember looked up at the larger dragoness, her features morphing into a scowl.
He needs to rest. He's been at this non-stop.
She then pointed a claw at Cynthia.
She almost killed him.
Cynthia wanted to speak, but Elincia cut her off before she could speak.
Spike was well within her safety, merely enduring the strength of the trial,
she said evenly. Ember was about to retort, but Spike brushed her chest to ease her down and looked at the charcoal elder.
Why must I continue right away?
A bit of a whine left him.
I've completed 3 of your 4 trials. Is it necessary to really continue on after another?
Elincia gave a small pitiful look at the whelp, feeling her heartstrings plucked at seeing him battered and exhausted from his last trial. Yet she knew that the other dragons around the valley would not wait, and it was already harsh enough that they come in inspecting to see the whelp fall. Dusk was about to approach in a few hours for the trials to be completed.
For this trial,
she began,
it will not be physical. Regardless of what it is,
yelled Ember,
Spike needs to rest and recover. Lord Ember, cease your prattling over your consort,
Elincia said sharply.
The sooner we begin, the sooner the trials can end. If you truly want them to end for him, he will complete this final one. There will be no more after this.
She paused and then lowered her voice.
You end this here. He may be a successor or elder, but his future can be far more grand if you were to finish them all. Don't let your emotions ruin his legacy here.
Ember all but growled at this once more. Spike just rubbed his head against hers, easing her. Then she saw that he had a determined look.
It's okay, Ember. It's okay. If it's one more trial, then I can handle it. I can handle it.
Ember wasn't so sure, and she gave him a worried look.
But, Spike, you need to rest. You've been at this most of the day.
Spike untangled himself from her, but stayed close.
And like I've said before, I've done some pretty intense stuff for Equestria. I'm pretty sure I can handle what's next.